Well, thanks a lot, Dave. Have to give, as normal, I have to give a lot of thanks to my cohorts in crime here. Dave is our chief recruitment officer. He gets everybody to these meetings, and Connie is our chief technology officer. He makes everything possible. So thank you guys for doing that, and thank you all for coming back again this evening. And this presentation, I think, is only going to be about 4 hours long, Dave. I hope that's okay. Not really. Anyway, for those of you that were able to join us last time, you got to hear and see a little snapshot about how a general obligation bond is put together and all the things that go into that, the strategies, the planning, the data collection, all that kind of stuff. It's just unbelievable. So for this seminar, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to initialize the bond and all of the things that a college or, for that matter, a K-12 district, basically any educational public institution, the type of things that they have to go through in order to maximize and realize what the general obligation bond means. So this one is titled Initializing Measure Y. All right, so our topics for discussion today, we're going to talk about the process that's involved in bringing it from the first day, which is the day that all the votes are tallied up, the election is certified by the recorder's office, and it's put into process. We're going to talk about some of the challenges that go along with that, many of the opportunities, not only for the college and the students and all the folks that build it and design it, but also for all of the material suppliers, the vendors, all of the folks that actually service all of those different market sectors that go into building a building and putting a public project together. We're going to talk about the strategy that the college or any other entity has to go through in order to get that project rolling, overcoming inertia. And then finally, at the end of the seminar, you're welcome to ask me any questions that you like, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my knowledge. All right, so right in the very beginning, everybody wants to see results. So recall from last time we talked about Measure Y. That is the Citrus Community College District General Obligation Bond that was passed in November of 2020. It is a Proposition 39 bond, which means that we lowered the approval rate down to 55%, lowering it from 2/3. That was one of the things that's in statute that's been in there for a number of years. We did take advantage of that. Our bond actually passed with, I believe it was right around 57 or 58%, which is actually pretty good for a Prop 39 bond. Can also recall from the last seminar that the entire measure is based upon our educational facilities master plan, meaning that once we do our data collection and extrapolate all of the information out of it, go through all of the different constituent groups, which means all of the faculty, the Senate, all of the other groups that are involved, all the way from management to all of the union employees as well. Everything goes into the educational facilities master plan in support of the educational plan for the delivery of education to all of our students. And so within that, we have every group has different expectations. Namely the ones that are of primary importance, of course, the Board of Trustees, being that it is a Prop 39 bond. We have a CBOC, which is a Citizens Bond Oversight Committee. That is one of the requirements that a district has to have and organize and manage if you have a 55% 39 bond. So all of our bonds that we passed in the district have always had a bond oversight committee. Faculty has expectations. They want to see their new buildings in place, and then of course the students do. So one of the first things that happened, believe it or not, we were setting in one of our committee meetings, and first question out of the gate was, so when do we get to see a building? And it's funny because everybody wants all those results, and some folks, because they're not necessarily familiar with all of the work that goes into delivering something like that, A lot of times they'll reference regular private work and how fast a building can go up. You know, a typical education building is probably 4 or 5 times the length of time that it takes to deliver a private building. So everybody wants to see it. They think that some things happen overnight, which everybody on this call right now, I'm sure knows that simply does not happen. There's a bunch of things that you have to go to just to get things rolling. So we have wishes versus reality. So you said in a meeting, and maybe it's a trustee, maybe it's a faculty member, maybe they're reporting back to the faculty senate. They think that that building that's up there on the right of your screen and the one down at the lower right of the screen, they think that they just magically occur. So the wishes are, it just gets done. You know, there isn't anything else to do. There's a little bit of dust in the air, you know, maybe a little bit of discomfort. I don't get to park my car in the regular spot because you're going to use that as a staging area. But we all know that that is not the case. Reality is, first up, we have to have a bond offering. So what that means is that when the taxpayers vote on it, they're merely voting upon the debt. So in other words, the bond issuance that they will see reflected in their property tax. So that's an increase. Typical increase is $25 per $100,000 in valuation. But that isn't where the money comes from. The money actually comes from the bond offering. And what that means is that the district, through the finance office, they have to get some bond counsel on board, which means that there's a separate contract for that. We have to have the consultant, the bond counsel, and there actually has to do, there's a lot of financial stuff that goes into the actual bond offering. A lot of it is based upon the credit worthiness of the district. Do you have other bonds in place? Our district is in a very good spot. We only have one other general obligation bond that is on the books. If you went to one of the districts, typically over in the LA proper region, some of those districts have 3, 4, 5, 6 different bonds on the books. So their bonding capacity is going to be entirely different from what ours is. Their credit rating would be entirely different from what ours is. So on the bond offering side, once bond counsel gets on board, there is a lot of planning that goes into it. A date is picked, and then what actually has to happen, our chief finance officer has to go to one of a couple different cities. If you're on the West Coast, typically it's the city of San Francisco. If you're on the East Coast, or if you choose to, you usually go to New York City, and that is where you actually offer up the bonds and put them on the market for sale. So again, based upon your credit worthiness, that reflects in how much interest the taxpayers have to pay in your local area for the bonds that are actually sold. All right, so that kind of covers the bond offering. When the money comes in, that goes into a separate account. Typically, it's the capital outlay account, and those funds are accounted for across the board. Every dollar is accounted for, everything is reconciled. And there's a lot of scheduling that goes into the bond offering. So for example, if a district were to go out, sell all their bonds, in our case, it's $298 million, and you check it in the bank, the IRS is going to come knocking on your door because you simply can't go out and build all of those buildings that you said you would build fast enough to consume the capital. So there's a time limit on it. If you have the money sitting in the account and it's gaining interest on your behalf, then you run into a problem that is called arbitrage. You have to pay penalties on that. That is one thing that our district has never had to do. So the scheduling portion is quickly tied into when are you actually going to deliver your buildings, taking into account how long does it take to build, how long does it take to design, how long does it take to go through the authority having jurisdiction, which in our case, that would be the division of the state architect. So once you have a master schedule, you can actually come up with, well, master schedule on the building side, then that would be the method by which you would derive your finance schedule. So in our case, with 298 million, we're probably looking at least 3 different sales of the bonds. So the first one, probably between 75 and 100 million dollars would be gained. That would go into the coffer, and then your building plan, scheduling and everything else would come off of that. Once that one is getting close to consumption, you would go back to San Francisco or New York with your bond counsel, have another offering, and then the same process would occur for however many times you're going to sell your bonds. All right, so shared governance. Remember, we're a public entity, and in the state of California, California community colleges are under a shared governance plan. So with that being said, in order to bring our master schedule forward, not only on the building side, but also on the finance side, it has to go through a number of committees. So in this case, we actually have 2 main committees that report back to our steering committee, and then the steering committee reports up to not only the president superintendent, but to the board of trustees as well. So the first committee that all of this information has to go through is the Physical Resources Committee. I am one of the primary people that is on that committee. Once stuff gets approved in the Physical Resources Committee, which is primarily on physical plant side, so all of the building systems, that type of deal. Once anything gets approved on there, the finance side takes over. That committee is the Financial Resources Committee. They would approve any of the financial offerings. Once that is said and done, then it goes over to steering. That is just a brief snapshot of the shared governance process, but on any one of those committees, you have all of the different constituent groups that have a seat there. That means that all of the different unions, the faculty union, the adjunct union, CSEA, management, supervisory, all of the different groups are on there, so they all have their say in the matter. Normally, we don't have any problems at all. There's a few comments, that's usually the crux of it, but because we've done a very good job at our district, that's how it usually turns out. Most people are understanding and agreeable. The next reality is the fact that in order to get anything going, we have to go through the process of bringing the consultants on board, all of the professional services. Those are all procured by a typical request for qualifications and proposals method. Ours are done by not only invitation, but they're also published in the paper. We do that for a number of reasons. You get a better pool of folks that are interested in your program, and it covers all of the transparency stuff that you have to deal with. Remember that everything is reconciled. We don't want to leave any stone unturned. You want to make sure that you do it not only the right process, but you make sure that you do it the right way in order to garner the correct result at the end. All right, so the reality priorities. The first thing that we have on the list, because our program is a large building program, is a CEQA. So I gave you a little chart on the right. This one I scabbed off of the internet, and is a basic plan related solely to CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act. So one of the first things that we did is start talking about, the projects that are going to be entailed in the bond program. Which ones are highest priority? Which ones can we do? Which ones are going to provide difficulties? All that kind of stuff. And with all of the stuff that's happened over the last, I'll say 16 months or so with COVID, one of the things that we had to do is secure the campus. Prior to COVID, our campus was open 100%. That means 24 hours a day. We actually have campus safety on campus. They monitor everything. But what it really means is that anybody in the neighborhood can come on campus. They can run the track if they want to, walk their dog, do whatever. With COVID, we had to secure the campus. So all of the different ingress points to the campus had to be bollarded up, had to be roped off, chained up so that nobody could get on campus in theory. due to that, one of the things that we discovered is that we don't necessarily have a proven and quality method by which to lock our campus. So campus safety had to go out, do some manual chains, some bollards that are, you know, the typical ones that you would see that are movable. And what the campus wants to do now is come up with a better plan for securing each one of the vehicular aprons to campus. So that involves going out, installing pipe gates, whatever it may be. So with that being said, CEQA was the absolute very first thing that we wanted to do. We've already sent out a RFQ for that. We've already received a couple different submissions, and it's actually been board approved at the last board meeting. So we do have a consultant on board. One of their first tasks is going to be looking at, well, not only all of the things that go into CEQA preparation, but the transportation portion is going to be one of the first things that we're going to ask them to look at. Seeing that securing the ingress points on the vehicular side to the campus, putting up pipe gates, you can't have, you know, somebody who doesn't know that a new gate is there and pulling into the apron, not being able to turn around, possibly stopping traffic in the street. That's going to be nothing but an issue. So looking at the CEQA side, on the vehicular transportation side, for all of the cities that adjoin our property is going to be one of the primary duties that they're going to undertake very first. Second up would be PMCM, and that one is actually underway right now. And then after that one would be all of the design firms, all of the architects, the engineers, all the subconsultants that go into that. So those are the three on the RFQ side: CEQA, design, and PMCM. And then in our case, you know, seeing that we have a $298 million bond, and if you recall from last time, we'll talk about a little bit later in the program, our needs that are based off of the Educational Facilities Master Plan, the needs tally up to about $550 million. So one of the things that is difficult, especially for our district, is the fact that we don't have any cash that can be wasted. So one of the first things that we did is to begin scheduling with all of the constituent groups on the prioritization of the projects. So I talked about the Physical Resources Committee. One of the things that we brought forward to them is our idea on which project would go first, which one would go second. And in that, there are a few variables that have to be considered. Those I will talk about a little bit later. Next up is engaging the California Community College's Chancellor's Office, in particular the FPU, which is the Facilities Planning Unit. So in the state of California, all of the capital plans for every campus in California actually has to be reported to the Chancellor's Office. All of those plans are the little acronym there, the 5YCP, that's the 5-year capital outlay plan. That lists all of your construction projects that you're going to be undertaking. That has to be reconciled by the Chancellor's Office. There's a formal plan that has to be submitted. There's a lot of work that goes into it. It actually takes a number of weeks to put together. So engaging the Chancellor's Office, in particular your specialist that is assigned to your campus, is extremely important because you want to give them as much information as you can, give them a heads up on what's going to be coming down the pipe so that they can be your advocate for it. In our case, we have developed 5 IPPs, which are initial project proposals. Those are the first thing that you do in order to engage the Chancellor's Office. And basically an IPP is, they're segregated by project. So we have on our EFMP, there are 6 major projects that we want to undertake. There is one other building that we do want to undertake, and then there's a series of smaller projects. But out of the 6, what we did is we know that we're not going to be able to get all 6 of them done because there's simply not enough money. So we went ahead and developed 5 IPPs for the top 5 categories. all of those are ones that have a high priority and a high probability of actually being funded. So 5 IPPs were developed. They were sent in to the Chancellor's office, or I should say they will be sent in. All of those have to be approved by the Board of Trustees. It's always done in June, and we already have our agenda topic submitted, and that will be on next Tuesday's meeting. So those IPPs will be approved. After they're approved by the Board of Trustees, there is a computer program that we use in conjunction with the Chancellor's office, and it's called Fusion. Fusion, again, is an acronym, and it actually means the Facilities Utilization Space Inventory OpNet. So everything is submitted for every college in California or every community college through that program. Once the IPPs are approved, a button is pushed, it immediately gets transferred over to the Chancellor's office where they can see everything. The next thing that has to occur when you want to bring your project before the Department of Finance, it has to go through another formal process, and that's called an FPP. That is called a final project proposal. So just to give a little bit of insight, the work on the work that's entailed in putting one of those together, separate outside consultants, almost 100% of the time have to be engaged in order to do that. You really need somebody who is very, very good at putting, not only working through Fusion, which is a complex plan or a complex software plan, but you really need to engage a professional architectural design firm to do it in conjunction with some other consultants that are very good at estimating, basically putting all of the verbiage together in order to present your case before not only the Chancellor's office, but before the Department of Finance. So once you do that, we have one FPP that's going to be moving forward. It's not on the book yet. I'll tell you a little bit about that one in a second. But normally, for each one of our projects, we will have at least 3 of them that will have formal FPPs done. The work that goes into that is 2 or 3 months worth of work. Typically, a district can spend anywhere from a small amount of $25,000 upwards of $60,000, depending on the complexity for one FPP. So again, it's a description of the work that's going to be done. Your entire schedule gets submitted in there. An estimate of all the hard costs, all the soft costs, material takeoffs, everything is located in there. If you have a CM, you have to account for that. The Chancellor's office and Department of Finance see everything in there. And when you're doing a formal project proposal, almost every time it's because you're seeking state funding. So on our side, I mentioned 3 that will obviously be done on FPP side. Those are ones that we engaged another consultant to do a study for us, and they looked at the point system that goes into calculating how many points you will get on a project, and the results came back that our 3 main projects tally very high. There is very, very high probability that we would get state funding on those. So those will be converted later into from an IPP to an FPP. We do have one that is going to be a Category A project, which is on the safety side. We're actually working on it right now, doing all of the paperwork and the estimating that's involved in that, and that is in regard to some underground infrastructure on our fuel gas infrastructure across the campus. The other thing that we have to do, which is under the reality priorities, is engage the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee. That one is extremely important. It's required by law. You have to have all of that in place in order to maintain the 55% on the Prop 39 bond. So you can't really move forward until you have that in place. We're very fortunate because we're just finishing up our first GO bond, which was done like 14 years ago. So the good folks that sit on our oversight committee all agreed to continue their terms, and they will be our new CBOC under Measure Y, previously sitting on Measure G. So long story short, this is just a little snapshot of a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that has to occur even before you can even think about undertaking design of a project or whatever. All right, so it's strategy that guides the process. I talked about the prioritization of the buildings, which ones are high likelihood of getting funding, all of that kind of stuff. So long story short, when you do a takeoff on your EFMP, we have these different projects that are identified in there. So STEM being one, CTE, library, dining hall, a classroom building, kinesiology, an offsite building. That one is actually, if it does get built, it will be a brand new structure that sits over on a property that sits adjacent to our campus right now. We purchased that property a number of years ago, thinking that we were going to turn it into a parking lot. That is no longer the case. It was decided upon by a number of folks on our stakeholder side that we would be better off having a building that actually serves the campus over there. And a lot of the student need for parking has actually declined a lot, so we don't have as many problems with that. And then we took the rest of our projects, Efficiency 1, 2, and 3. Those are all the extra projects that are spread across the entire campus. Could be something as simple as signage. It could be all of the ADA stuff, all of the things that go into that. So when you look at the total tally, we have $548 million worth of need. Measure Y supplies 298. The offsite building and the other 6 major buildings account for about a little over $300 million worth of that. So thinking about how are we going to get all of these projects out there? How are they going to be prioritized? How is it going to go through the shared governance process? How are we going to decide which one's in and which one's out? That is something that is very difficult to do. So constituent planning via the shared governance process. I told you a lot about the different committees, the physical resources, the financial, and the steering. If you don't get those folks on board, you will have a stalled project all the way across the board. There's a number of districts that, it takes them years to get out of the ground. Some of them, one of the major complaints from all of the stakeholders on the taxpayer side are, you know what, you guys have had the money, you've sold the bonds, you haven't done anything for 2 years. What are you going to do? When you get stalled by not strategizing and making the planning and taking advantage of the process to the benefit of the campus, that's where you end up with wasted time. And that's one of the things that we don't want to do. So one of the first things that we did, and this occurred a little over a week ago, is we developed some prioritization variables, and we needed to get agreement primarily through all of the different constituent groups, meaning physical resources and financial resources. The first one being up is the Physical Resources Committee. So what we did is we had an agenda item, and in there we did a brief presentation on some of the things that you folks have seen in these slides here. You've got a number of needs. You've got basically half the money that you need in order to get everything on the EFMP completed. Therefore, we have to have a prioritization process that everybody has to agree upon so that it can move from one group to another. And then eventually that leads to the selling of the bonds via the issuance through either one of those 2 cities, San Francisco or New York. So when you think about it, some of our buildings that we have on our list scored extremely high, which means that on the tally that the chancellor's office uses through their committee and through their unit up in Sacramento, there's a list that you get points on, and anything from Is it a building that is required for growth? Maybe you have an educational program where you have too many students. There's not enough space for them to be housed in order to deliver the educational program. There's other points for different types of programs. For instance, like career technical education is a strong need in the state of California. You actually get 25 extra points if you have a building that is going to house CTE. So you look at your building, you look at the amount of points that it can score, and then you have to look at the other folks that are going to be competing against you. So in our case, the folks that compete against us are all of the campuses that have other GO bonds that show up in our calendar year or in the future that have similar buildings that would be scoring against us, all trying to capture funding from the Department of Finance. So funding capture, if you look at that, that means that are my points high enough to beat out my competitor, which might be one of the colleges that is down the street from me. Once we had a tally of how each one of our buildings would score, we realized that there's at least 2 of our buildings that would score probably 100%, which means that providing that Department of Finance, that the state actually has money left in their coffers on their bond, that they would be able to fund our building. So funding capture is priority number 1, because remember, we don't have enough money to build everything on our EFMP. We got $298 million, you have $548 million in need. If we know for sure that some of our buildings are going to be able to capture funds from Department of Finance, that means that that $298 number goes up. So for instance, on our CTE building, it's valued a little over, estimates show a little over 70 million. If we can maximize state bonds on that, you're going to get 15 or 20 million from the state. Now you got more money to go along on top of the 298. The second variable are the educational programs. Campus, faculty senate, all of the groups. The number one reason why you go to our campus is for the educational program. Everybody that works there serves the needs of the students. So outside of can we build it, the educational program and the needs of the students, everything that's identified in the EFMP is priority number 2. On top of that, the next variable would be the buildability to the EFMP. We'll talk about that one a little bit later, but what that really means is that how do I build my building and maximize my funds? So for instance, if I have to tear down 2 other buildings in order to build this one in the same place, then where am I going to house the students that are in the 2 buildings that are being raised? That means that I have to bring, temporary facilities on campus. That means swing space, a lot of money and rental of, all the different modular buildings that it would take to do that. And then you've got all the money that you would have to spend on the infrastructure, the electrical supply, sewage, you name it. All those things at the end of the bond, once it's built out, all of that would go away. So really, it's paying for stuff to get you through that really doesn't give you anything in the end. It's just temporary. So buildability to the EFMP and being able to minimize the funds that would go into that is priority number 3. So in taking those 3 variables to the Physical Resources Committee, everyone completely agreed. So we had 100% vote. That moves forward. From that, it goes over to the Financial Resources Committee. They take a look at the same thing, and my guess is that it will be moved forward and through their committee as well. All right, so you've seen this diagram before. So a good example of the buildability, if you look at the building on the right part of the screen, that's the STEM building. So if you went in and read the EFMP, which is about 800 pages, primarily focused on the last 100 pages of it, the long story short would tell you that a new STEM campus on this site would take place of about 3 other buildings. So the problem in that is if we prioritize STEM as being number 1, where you look at that structure and where it would be built, the 2 buildings that it takes place of are not in the STEM program. They're actually in the CTE program. So now I've got an issue. If I put that one as number 1, I've got 2 buildings that are, 100,000 square feet or better. Where am I going to put everybody in there? So when you think about that, STEM becomes an issue. If you go south of that and you see the CTE building, if you walked around our campus, you would realize that the placement of that new CTE microcampus actually goes where an existing old Diesel Tech building is at. There are very, very few students that utilize that building. The diesel program could easily be taken care of in the other technology engineering or technology development building. With that being said, it makes a whole lot of sense to go ahead and raise that building. While CTE is being constructed, the impact to the campus would be minimized. Yeah, there would be power shutdowns and stuff like that, normal course of business. But the real benefit to the campus is the fact that if you do the CTE building first, you do not have to bring in any interim housing. So no interim housing, that means I don't have to pay a monthly lease payment to a portable building manufacturer for probably a couple years. Think about all of the costs that you save off your bond program, which means that the money that the taxpayers authorized and they're paying on their property tax would actually directly go into the investment of the building and not be being thrown into the trash can. So with that being said, CTE was presented to the Physical Resources Committee as being priority number 1. Next one up would be STEM building. STEM building going in, again, that one is where 2 other buildings are actually located that house folks that would be in the new CTE building. So what a wonder that is. You do the CTE building first, get the build out done, you have your grand opening, and then all of a sudden the folks that are in the other 2 buildings directly to the north, they move all of their goods, all their educational program, all the faculty, all the students move into a brand new space, thereby leaving those 2 buildings open. They would be raised, and now you're free and clear to put your STEM microcampus on board, do the build out on that, and then that brings up the next buildings that would be raised, thereby, again, no more bringing swing space on board, and then it just goes from there down. So proper planning on the buildability side saves taxpayers money, saves a lot of heartache, it saves a lot of planning, and really what it does is it maximizes your dollar for the people that are actually paying for it. And not only that, the faculty and the students are very, very happy in that. And then think about, we're a community college. One of the first people that contacted me after the bond was actually passed was the student newspaper. So you can imagine all of the things that they would be reporting. Campuses run into problems when there's problems for the students or for the faculty, and that's entirely reasonable. So you want to diminish that as best you can by undertaking a plan like this one with the buildability as being priority number 3 on the variable side is really not only a good thing to do, but it's a best management practice as well. All right, so managing actually guides the strategy. With that being said, you have to think about the construction phasing and the construction schedule. That leads into the funding schedule. So a lot of that I already kind of talked about, but just to give you an idea on the construction phasing side, I spoke about an FPP that's going to be brought forward probably within the next 2 months regarding a Class A project, which is a safety project. So one of the things that we did in engaging one of our consultants that deals with all of the folks in the chancellor's office and making sure that it lines up. They have a good snapshot on funding streams that are going to be coming down in the future. So we engaged them, and one of the things that they asked is, there's still money left on the table up in Department of Finance. Do you folks have any priority A projects that you would like to undertake? So we started doing some thinking, and one of the things that did come to mind is we have, obviously we're an old campus, it's over 100 years old. One of the things that came up was the fuel gas infrastructure. We have a number of materials out there, all of them were code compliant at the time, but as time goes by, you have a new, code phase coming in every 3 years. Technology changes on material science side. Make a long story short, we have our fuel gas infrastructure that probably has at least 3 different materials on the piping side. Some of it's steel, some of it's PVC, some of it's HDPE. We've done a number of repairs, but we do have one thing on campus that kicks in a safety item, even though we don't have any, I wouldn't say that it's a danger or anything like that, which it's not, but it does kick it in to where it makes it entirely viable to undertake a safety project. So a number of years ago, unbeknownst to the district, when they brought in a modular classroom building, they landed it, and where they happened to land it was directly over one of the trunk lines on the fuel gas side. So if you look at the mechanical code today, even back then, you're not supposed to place a building. It can't be over a trunk line. So with that being said, it was actually our main line coming in from the gas company. And we had a couple of communications with them. They went ahead and deeded over that trunk line to us. So long story short, that's going to be one of the items that we're going to be, it's actually a benefit because it qualifies us for an A project and direct conversion into an FPP. What that means is that on the safety side, if a district has something like that, you actually go to the front of the line. So it's kind of like showing up at the airport, and you might have, if you're on Southwest, you might have an A35 or something like that, and then you look over and you've got all the pre-board people that are getting on before you for whatever reason. You might say that the Class A project is a pre-board. You go directly to the front of the line, you get priority service, you get the dollars first. So that one is going to go up to the chancellor's office within the next couple months once it's board approved, and probably looking at, I'd say 99.9% chance of getting funding on that one. That means that it would probably go into the bidding phase and then leading into construction probably about a year out. That's a good thing for us. All right, so phasing is extremely important on that project. We had a sit-down meeting. You can imagine that the fuel gas line goes throughout the entire campus. Broke it into 3 different phases, and that's how we're going to attack it, because you can't tear up everything at the same time. Construction schedule, how are you going to lay down your buildings if you're competing for funding stream from the state? You have a specific construction schedule. You can only get 1 funded per year. So even if you were the best designer and best builder in the world, there's no way that you could build and design one of those buildings in a year. So you're probably looking at least 2 years in between each project. So construction schedule gets penciled out. That ties in directly to the funding schedule. Remember, we have to sell our bonds. So how our CBO goes to any one of those cities in order to, with bond counsel, to sell the bonds so that we can get the funds, that has to be planned out so that it coincides with the construction schedule, so that you can actually consume the funding as you go, thereby eliminating any arbitrage problems with the Internal Revenue Service. Okay, so another thing you have to think about is the state of California bond schedule. So how much money does the state actually have available? So what if, remember back in November, there was actually a large bond, a California statewide bond that was on the ballot, and it did not pass. Had it passed, there would have been more money in the coffers for the folks that have general obligation bonds to leverage. So one of the things that we're looking at is, what's the possibility of a California statewide bond in 2022? Is there one on the docket? Which I think that there will be, but what is the probability of it passing? Those are all things that, you know, the dice, once you roll it, the book's not settled yet. So those are things that you have to think about. With that in mind, you have to think about the financial market schedule. So what is the CPI? If you read the news today, you know, inflation rate is very, very high. That means that the time value of money is diminishing. So today, if we could go out today and sell our bonds, you have X amount of money in the bank, but the interest rates are extremely low. CPI outpaces interest rate return. So that means that basically as time goes by, you're losing money, which means that you can build less and less and less every day. We have to think about microeconomies. So in our area of Los Angeles County, we're actually in a good spot. We're not in one of the high concentrated areas, for instance, like the city of San Francisco or up in the Bay Area. If you have, you know, say San Francisco City College, if they go out to build something, their cost of building is a lot higher up there than it is for us down here in, you know, northern Los Angeles County, simply because materials are harder to get through the city. Labor is harder to come by. Maybe they have other problems that they have to deal with, like a PLA or stuff like that. All those things have to go into when you plan your construction schedule and lay it down, overlaying the funding schedule and thinking about all those things. There have been districts that when the economy is bad and maybe they are going to get funding from the state, but possibly it's too many years out that they realize, you know, with the time value of money, even if I did get state funding, it still would give me less to build with than even if I financed it today myself. So those things are all very, very important things that you have to think about. And then also, financial markets affect not only the cost, they also affect DSA. So the way that it affects DSA is this: if the cost of building a building goes up, DSA doesn't necessarily care about that. If they look at the building as a replacement and it exceeds a certain percentage, say you're going to modernize it. If it costs too much, especially in a time where the CPI and cost escalation is great and the time value of money is diminishing, that means that don't even undertake doing a modernization, because DSA is not going to let you do that anyway because it exceeds their cost. So all of those things have to be considered. And what we're really getting at is the equation is not just one variable, it's actually a polynomial. So that's why we call it making our polynomial decisions. They all go into the planning and the strategizing on every single one of the projects. All right, so one of the other things that we undertake almost immediately are standard specifications. So when I say that we want to develop standard specifications, what we really want is to be able to give each one of the design firms, once they get on board, once they're vetted out through the RFQP process and they're board approved on our pool, we want to be able to give them our book that has all of our standard specs in it. And the reason we do that is, there you see on all of the bullet points: to control quality, to control cost, to control public contract code requirements, to control the design, inventory, shrink, and perception. So with that being said, I want to control the quality. If I leave, that doesn't mean that I'm going to give the design firm our specs on virtually everything that goes into a building. It's probably going to, at best, cover maybe 10%. But out of that 10% of the products or things that we want to go into a building, trust me, they will be in there for one of these reasons that you see on the screen. So quality control. If we are very, very proactive, say on maintaining our, I'll use the gas supply lines or the gas infrastructure as an example. If there is an item on something as simple as a shutoff valve that isn't going to be exercised, but maybe once every 3 years, we want to have the utmost in quality on that. So on something like that, I'm probably not going to let the mechanical engineer or the spec writer decide which one that they want to put in there. Cost is another big concern. If I have too many items, say for instance that, you know, it's again, something as simple as specifying, maybe it's a faucet for a lavatory. If I let each one of the design firms come up with a different faucet, then that means that I have to have in inventory a bunch of different manufacturers that basically cover the same item. So what happens in that, if they have too many products that are in inventory in our warehouse, inevitably you have shrink. So maybe that item gets kicked around, they get broken, falls off the shelf, whatever. That means that the cost isn't being controlled. That means I have a lot of waste. So controlling the inventory, we have inventory set points. So when something gets down to a certain number, there are control points. An order is automatically placed, you get resupplied. We want to have design control. One of the big things on that is on the aesthetic side, for instance, on building signage. So if each architectural team were given the opportunity to, you come up with whatever you think, that means that each one of my buildings and all the signage, it all looks different. So on something like that, it's to control the cost and the quality as well as design and make it where it's uniform across campus. Now, the perception of that is that once the district delivers out some standard specifications on things, the perception is that the district has things under control. They're good purveyors of not only on the fiduciary side, but they're good managers of the things that they have to maintain over time. So with all that being said, the CDT is extremely important, because when you take the CDT class and all of the training in that, you learn about all the design specs and everything that goes in, especially on the spec writing side. All right, so standard specifications and the outcomes. You know, if you tell the design team or maybe one of the sub-consultants, I want a hamburger, if you just tell them that and you're not very specific, you might end up with a number of different items. On the bottom is the one that maybe that designer or the hamburger designer thinks that he's a minimalist. Well, here you go. If you're the designer of the hamburger that seems to think that everybody needs to go into it and everything on there and very fancy, then you end up with the hamburger on the right. It's still, the client said, I want a hamburger. If you're a little bit more specific on that, then you can tell them about, you know, the 4 different segregations: proprietary, performance, reference, standard, and descriptive. In our case, there are some specs that we would turn over to the design team that are proprietary. We would probably get a question regarding public contract code or on the or equal side. And normally what we would say is that it's either been board approved to be specified as proprietary, or I have a certain percentage of those items on campus that would deem it acceptable via PCC to be a proprietary spec. So just an example of the importance of the standard specifications. And I think that all the architects and designers that I've worked with, they've been very, very happy when you can give them that book. It saves a lot of work on their side. The outcome is better for not only them, but for our campus as well, not only on the design side, the aesthetics, but saving money and being responsible. All right, so professional services selection strategy. This is another big item that we have to undertake, or anybody has to undertake for a general obligation bond. So what I wanted to do is just take a brief amount of time to go over some of the things that we look at. So for any one of the professional services, it doesn't matter if it's the PMCM on the design side, whatever it may be, teamwork is number one. After that, it's, are they an active listener? So we've all come across the gentleman or the lady that you can sit there and tell them something and you flat out know they've heard me, but they didn't actively listen to anything that I said. Attitude is number 3. We want somebody that is a collaborator on the teamwork side, and someone that, you know, they have very good ideas, but they can also take a little bit of constructive criticism here and there as well. That's part of working together. If you show me somebody who has a good attitude, you probably have somebody that is really good on the teamwork side and is willing to work with all the other folks on the team. On the competency side, are they of a professional focus? So using an architect as an example, on the professional side, are they more form over function, or is it function over form? So you've got the design ones, and then you've got the engineering ones. So there has to be a balance in there. So that would be covered under the professional focus. On the process focus, I'm looking for, does their team know how the process flows? You have to have someone that is proficient with the authority having jurisdiction, all of the paperwork that has to be done, not only from the initiation of the project to final closeout and certification. So with that one being said, if you go on DSA's website, because that is our authority having jurisdiction, you can type up any district in California, whether it's a community college or whether it's a K-12 district. Go on there and you can see how many projects have not been closed out. Especially on the K-12 side, there's thousands. Our district right now has like 2 that haven't been closed out, and those are open projects. If you see a district that has a bunch that are not closed out, then what that really tells you is that the 2 stakeholders, the 2 primary stakeholders, one being the district and 2 being the design team, didn't follow through with closing out that project, and that makes both of them look bad. On the organizational level, how does a firm, again, whether it's an architect or any one of the other consultants, how is their firm organized? So using an architect as an example, on their design side, do they have somebody that follows the project not only from conception all the way through the CA and closeout, or does one member pass it off to another member along the way? Those are some of the things that we would be looking for. And then, are they actively involved? So in other words, does the main guy, does the principal, does he follow the project all the way through? Do we have one single point of contact, or do we have folks that are kind of going in and out? All right, on our design constituents, we want to take a look at their engineers. Are they in-house? Are they out? And all of the different consultants. So on the consultant side, using the CEQA RFQP that we had just put out and approved, we had a couple different submissions, and some of those consultants, some of the folks were all in-house, some were in-house, and then some were subbed out. We want to take a look at, you know, the actual working together and how do they get the job done. It doesn't matter if a lot of the work is actually subbed out. What really matters is how well do those teams interact with one another and lead to the project actually getting done. So where can the project go sideways? In this, we talk about our service providers, categories, and opportunities. So if you think about that, on the environmental side, you've got CEQA consultant, you've got the geotechnical, all the other things, hazmat, things that go into that. Hardly ever do we usually have a problem with that group. Then you've got the program and construction, which entails the PM/CM, or in some districts, they segregate them into PM and CM. And then you've got the design side, which entails the architects and the engineers, all the vendors and suppliers. Then you have the builders and constructors. On a normal project, if something goes sideways, it usually occurs under either the program and construction, the design, or with the builders or constructors. And then inevitably, you've got the attorneys coming in. So for some folks, Where a project can actually go sideways, you can kind of go straight to the bottom and go to the attorneys. If you have a district that turns over everything to their council and lets their council derive every single piece of paper that goes out, as an example, on the RFQP process, if you have an attorney develop all of the submission requirements, all of the verbiage that goes into it, then what you're usually going to have is an expert at making sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, but not necessarily being an expert in that specific area. So in other words, one of the things that I've heard, if an attorney writes the RFQP for an architect, then it's very, very common that they want all of their financial documents turned in with the RFQP as a separate submittal. If you think about that alone, each one of those firms has to go out and engage their CPA. That's going to cost them thousands of dollars to put all that paperwork together. It exacerbates the amount of time, and it doesn't provide anything, really of value to the district. If someone's going to go bankrupt, they're going to go bankrupt. If a design firm has been in business for a long time and the economy is good, it's probably not going to do me any good to look at their financials. So that's just an example of some of the things that can go in that starts a bad seed in the very beginning. In my district, we try to be more practical and more constructive per se. All right, so for suppliers, material providers, a lot of the opportunities in there are, I'll get questions about how do we know about a project that's coming up? I can't get in to see this guy. Where do my opportunities for finding out about all of the stuff that's going to be happening? So with that being said, I would say follow the local elections. So those are easy to follow. If you look it up in the paper after there's a major election, it will simply list all of the districts that have passed bonds. You know that all of those bond issuances, they're all going to have viable projects that are going to be coming up in the future. That tells you which district to contact and where the money's going to be. Another good thing to follow would be CASH, which is California's Coalition for Adequate School Housing. They're the #1 developer of information for all of the K-12 districts. You can look them up on the web, go to their website. They'll tell you about not only the bond issuances, they'll tell you about job opportunities, who's got money, who doesn't. They have an annual conference that you can go to as a vendor. A lot of the architects, the CMs go down the line, even the builders go to their annual conference. That's another good lead to follow. Same thing with CCFC. CCFC is actually managed by, they have a separate board. I'm on that board. They're managed by the same group of folks up in Sacramento. They have an annual conference. They provide the same opportunities that CASH does. That one is another very good one to get involved with. Possibly go to their annual conference. That's where you're actually able to mingle with all of the district folks that attend. Another very good lead. Another good one to follow is CMAA. You can become a member of that. You can go to their annual conference. They have seminars all the time. Ton of very good information in there. All of the CM companies are members. Those are other good opportunities for the material suppliers and vendors to follow. Same thing with CSI, same thing for AIA, and then a couple others, and I've only listed a couple here that are other very, very good opportunities. That is the LA County Office of Education and the Orange County Department of Education. Both of those, as well as all of the other entities like Riverside as well, they all have facilities offices. They all hold monthly meetings. Any one of the vendors are welcome to go to those. You can actually contact the local contact at each one of those, and they would be very open to hearing a presentation by whatever product that you have. So long story short, all of those are opportunities, but really know what business you're in. And I use that because a lot of folks don't know what business they're in. So with that being said, you may think that you're a paint supplier. Well, I supply paint, but no, really what you are is a problem solver. So for an example, in my district, we buy paint from one material supplier, and I've never seen the rep in my office at all. So whatever area you're in, if you're the rep representing whatever product it may be, make contact with your client, with the folks that are buying your stuff. Let them know that you're there. Let them know that you're there to help and know your product. Get to know your client, and you'll see enormous opportunities come out of that. I have talked about the cast of characters before, but just a brief overview again. The owner, that's the district. The players, those are the architects, the engineers, the contractors, the consultants, the material suppliers, the vendors, everything that goes into putting that project together. And the audience, once again, well, those are the students, the staff, faculty, and in my case, it's the overall community, because a lot of those outside folks that are not on campus, they use our campus, they support us, they're the audience, they're the ones that we're all working together to try to impress with the wonderful buildings that we're going to be building. All right, so one more time, the owner is the conductor of the orchestra. The players, they're the backbone of the ensemble. You guys are the ones that make all the difference in the world. If you don't perform your instrument the way that it's supposed to be played, then the music doesn't sound any good, and the audience, well, they won't enjoy it if it doesn't sound any good. But all the folks that are in there doing the best that they can and using all of their talents and putting their good foot forward, the audience gets to enjoy the music, which in my case, typical building is engineered for 50 years. Not going to go back there and redo anything outside of some technology changes and some paint. 50 years is a long time. So what you want to do is actualize becoming a better player. Players are the backbone. Again, what we all should do all the time is continually evaluate our business model. Maybe you need to conduct a service sector map. That is a technical term. If you look it up, it's used in the marketing business. If you initiate a service sector map, it will, believe it or not, it will tell you where your problems lie, and it will help you analyze your business model, and maybe that leads to some changes. Initiate continual training. I've had several firms call me up that I've gotten to know, and some of the ones that are actually working on our campus, they've asked for, a collaborative event. Maybe it's going over and doing a couple-hour in-service training with them. Maybe they need, some information on how purchasing actually works. The more you learn, the more training you have, the better you become. Become client-friendly. I can't tell you how many people think that, I use the GM model. For years, Roger Smith, he was the CEO back in the 70s, and his remark was, if we build it, they buy it. And that's not the way to become client friendly. Know your client stakeholders and know your client gatekeepers. Typically the stakeholders, they're the people that you really deal with, but some of the folks that can stop a project or stop anything, those are the gatekeepers. And maybe it's because maybe they're in purchasing, maybe the paperwork doesn't come through. That's why it's important to learn about how everything is processed so that you can be client friendly on the gatekeeper side too. All right, and we've seen this one before. The wise musicians are those who play what they can master. If you play the trumpet, don't go play the kettle drum. And with all that being said, I know I probably took too much time, but thank you all for coming this evening, and I hope you enjoyed the seminar and were able to glean something out of it.